Hey everyone, my name is Paula and this is Relatively Refined. In today's video, we are going to explore the answer to the age-old question, why do we thrift? I hope you'll join me. We're going to have a lot of fun, tell some stories, and share some thrift hauls. Before we jump into the video, I do want to share some friend mail that I received recently and say thank you to some lovely subscribers who were very generous and sent along some goodies in the mail. First of all, from our viewer Arlene, is this adorable book. It's called The Miracles on Maple Hill. And Arlene found this at her local library sale. She looked it over, and when she read it, it's about a little girl who moves to New England with her grandmother. She said it doesn't specifically say Vermont, but the story reminded her so much of when my sisters and I talk about our childhood in Vermont and growing up with our grandmother, and she thought it would be something that we would really enjoy reading. So Arlene, it's wonderful, and I agree. It's so nice to read about simpler times, and this book was really lovely. Thank you so much. Also in the mail from a viewer named Deborah, who hails from England, she sent, knowing my love of teapots, she sent these two lovely teapots. The first one is this blue and white one, which she thrifted. It's absolutely adorable. Is that not the cutest thing? I love this, Deborah. And she also sent this little tiny individual 1-cup green teapot. And this is vintage. It's from the British Railways, and it was used in the dining cars. How sweet is that? And I adore this color, as well as you all know how I feel about blue and white. In addition to the two teapots, she sent two little plates that have kind of a fall themed coloring to them. And they are just beautiful. And everything was packaged up so nicely, and it arrived completely intact, not a chip, not a crack, not a ding, nothing. They were in perfect shape. So Deborah, thank you so much, and Arlene, thank you as well. We really appreciate that. Nobody needs to do that, but what a lovely, sweet gesture, and I will treasure these items. So thank you so much. All right, well, I told you that in today's video, we're going to answer the age-old question, why do I like to thrift? And I thought about answering that question because the other day at school, a little girl was asking me, what do I like to do? What are things I do in my free time? And one of the things that I told her I enjoyed doing was going to thrift stores and thrift shopping. And she said, well, why do you like that? And that got me thinking, why do I like that? So in this video, I thought I would explore with you, why do I like to thrift? At first, the answer to that question seemed pretty easy and straightforward. I like to thrift because you can get some really nice things at pretty good prices. And that's true, like this set of dinnerware here. But as I started to think about it, I realized that thrifting is really so much more than that. I mean, you can get great stuff at good prices. And as I said, this French countryside dinnerware by Mikasa was a Facebook marketplace find for $65, which is a great bargain. It had all the plates and bowls and cups and saucers, service for $6 or $8. And you can see here I found it online. The same thing was $200 or $300. And look how beautiful it looks on my table with some thrifted napkins and some thrifted napkin rings that show Rainbow Row in Charleston. Absolutely beautiful. And nobody would ever know that I paid $65 for that instead of $300. So yes, you can get some great stuff at really good prices. It's also good for the earth. Buying pre-loved items keeps them out of the landfills and reduces the need for newly manufactured goods
which reduces our impact on precious natural resources and on the planet. I mean, a lot of my wardrobe is pre-loved, all of which I've gotten at bargain prices. But there's so much more to the thrifting experience than just getting a great deal. There are the stories. I love a good story, and so many times the items I find come with a good story. Like this beautiful tin that I recently purchased. The woman from whom I purchased it told me it had belonged to her mother, who was an artist, and she kept her art supplies in it. I was sold at that point. I love to know the history behind an object. And I can just see her mom's crayons or paints or other art supplies in this box. And that makes it all the more special. I mean, it was beautiful to begin with, and it's even more special now that I know the story behind it. Or the story behind these beautiful needlepoint pictures. I bought these at a yard sale from a woman, and I asked her, "Did you make these?" And she said that she had. She had stolen a few moments of time when she was raising her little children, when they were napping or playing quietly, and she would work on them, and they are a set of 4. They're absolutely beautiful. She would work on them whenever she had a free moment. And she eventually finished them and framed them and had them hanging in her house. But she was downsizing and didn't really have room for them. So she thought she would sell them at her tag sale. And I think they are absolutely gorgeous. How beautiful would these look hanging in the kitchen? And how much work went into these pictures. There's a little tiny ladybug in each one of them. And I just can't imagine the time it took. And I can just see her when her little kids were napping, getting her needlepoint out and working on these pictures and eventually finishing all 4 of them and framing them. And I had to have them when I heard that story. And now whenever I look at them, I'm reminded of that woman just getting those few precious moments of quiet and solitude when her babies were little to work on these beautiful needlepoint pictures. That's why I love thrifting, for those kinds of stories. And then sometimes the items I find don't have stories, but I wonder what their story is. Like this beautiful old covered dish. Where did this come from? Obviously somebody had it for a long time and it was special enough that they hung on to it and it looks well used. So how did it end up in the thrift store? How many Thanksgiving or Christmas dinners did this covered dish attend? Was it the mashed potatoes or the green beans or the stuffing or the asparagus casserole? What was in this dish and who served it? I love to think about stuff like that when I'm at a thrift store. Where did this come from and who had it? I really enjoy the stories and the history behind some of these objects, and that's why I love to thrift. These beautiful crane plates, how did they end up in a thrift store? What's the story behind them? Did someone receive them as a gift? I can just see them sitting on the back of someone's hutch, maybe a grandma's hutch in her formal dining room or living room. They're so beautiful. And I can't help but wonder, how did they get there? What's their story? I love to thrift and collect cookbooks, and they always tell a story. You can usually find the most well-loved recipes by all the stains on the pages or the dog-eared pages. Sometimes someone will have written some notes about a recipe to make adjustments to it, or there's little slips of paper tucked inside the cookbook. This particular cookbook, the Betty Crocker Boys and Girls Cookbook, was actually mine when I was a little girl. And I did a whole video on my cookbook collection, which I will link in the description box. But I looked through this cookbook so much when I was a little girl. I loved it. I read it like a novel. And you can see that there are some well-worn pages. In fact, I think I'll get to one part of this cookbook where the page is actually torn out. And it's a recipe, there it is, for peanut butter cookies or chocolate chip cookies. Clearly that was a favorite. And that tells a story. Now this Fannie Farmer Jr. cookbook also belonged to me when I was a little girl. And you can see that inside of it is tucked a recipe for Amish friendship bread. Now this was something that everybody was doing in the late 70s, I think. It's kind of like sourdough starter. You would make this friendship bread, and I think you had to divide the starter, and then you'd give half to your neighbor, and she could divide it and give some to her neighbor. Anyway, it was all the rage in the 70s, so I have that tucked in there. I think that's so funny. I should probably try that recipe. I did not have good luck with my sourdough starter, so maybe I'd have better luck with the Amish friendship bread. But cookbooks tell stories, and those stories are a big part of why I like to thrift. Now this cookbook clearly has been well loved, and it is so fun to page through and see the little notes that are written there by previous cooks and see which pages have the most stains on them or are dog-eared. I mean, it is falling apart. It was obviously a well-loved cookbook, and honestly, it's still my go-to cookbook if I need to know something about cooking that I'm uncertain of how long to cook certain kinds of meat, or your basic cupcake recipe or white cake. This cookbook is my go-to for those kinds of things. Clearly, it has been well used. And that's why I like to thrift, because of the stories the objects tell. And then there's the reminder of simpler times, happy times. I cannot resist a Nancy Drew book or a Little House on the Prairie book. Whenever I see them at the thrift stores, I pick them up because they remind me of my childhood. Those were the books that I loved. My parents were both teachers, and it was really important to them that myself and my siblings all read. And so we always got books on special occasions, Christmas, birthdays, and there was usually a Nancy Drew book in my Easter basket. And I cannot resist these books when I see them. And then another reason I like to thrift is the connection to the past. It connects me to the past, and it helps preserve happy memories for me. Much like my beloved Nancy Drew books, this old colander that I found at the thrift store so vividly reminds me of my Grandma Barry, my mother's mother. She had this exact colander, and she washed and drained countless pounds of potatoes in it for all kinds of holiday dinners, Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter. She had this really small kitchen with a huge stove in it, so it was usually pretty warm in there. But I can just see her boiling those potatoes on the stove and then carrying them over and draining them in this big giant porcelain sink she had into this very colander. And she mashed them up with a potato masher just like this one. And like every good Irish grandma, she added lots of butter and milk and salt, and they were delicious. And so every time I look at this colander, I'm reminded of my Grandma Barry, and it is such happy memories for me. I can feel the heat of her kitchen. I can smell what it smelled like on those holidays with the turkey or the roast in the oven and things cooking on the stove. It just is such a nostalgic feeling when I look at that colander. And these beautiful Irish music boxes, they so remind me of my mother's parents. My mom is from an Irish American family, and their Irish culture was very important to them. And so when I saw these music boxes, I had to have them. They just were so representative of my grandma and Grandpa Barry. That dapper Irishman with his shillelagh and the young Irish lass. I can hear my Uncle Romy, who is my mom's uncle, my great uncle, singing Danny Boy or When Irish Eyes Are Smiling. Another thing I love about thrifting is that sometimes you find an object that just awakens a memory or evokes such a strong memory for you. I talked about this recently when I found these vintage patterns, just holding them and feeling that tissue paper inside and the feeling of that envelope. Even the smell of it reminded me so much of my Grandma Bunny and her sewing room. She was a wonderful seamstress, and she would always sew us new pajamas every Christmas. And so one of the patterns was this pattern of three little girls, which reminded me of my two sisters and I. And it was a pattern for pajamas. And here's my sister Kathleen and I on Christmas in wearing some pajamas that I'm sure that my grandma made for us. Or this brown drip mug that I found. Grandma Bunny had this exact pattern. And so whenever I drink my coffee out of this mug, I am reminded of her. This pattern was were her good dishes. It was, I think, a false graph pattern, and she always used them for Thanksgiving. So now whenever I hold this cup or pour my coffee into it, I am reminded of her table set with those brown glazed dishes for Thanksgiving. There's a certain, I can almost smell the smell of the turkey, like I said, or my grandfather's pipe. I can just, that feeling you get when you think about those memories is so wonderful. And this mug brings all of that back for me. And that's why I like to thrift. Thrifting helps to connect us to people and places that we love, memories of childhood, special people, special experiences. You can find all of those things at the thrift store. When I see the mug or that colander, suddenly I'm that little girl in that Tyrolean dress again at my grandma's house with my dad sitting on the couch. Or I'm at Easter Sunday wearing my Sunday best with my little white hat and gloves. And that's why I like to thrift. I hope you enjoyed these musings on why I like to thrift. And now, stay tuned for our relatively refined segment in which we share our viewers' thrifted treasures. Today's treasure comes from Anna. She found this beautiful table on Facebook Marketplace. It was posted for free, and when she drove up on a rainy day, it was laying on the ground, legs not attached, without any cover. She put it in her car, brought it home, cleaned it up, bought some furniture refinish, and now it is her pride and joy, and I can see why. On the back, there was an old label that said that it was made from a tree from Vermont, and I can see that that is a Weston Bowl Mill label, which was a place not too far from where I grew up. So Anna, thank you so much for sharing this beautiful treasure with us. It certainly brought back some memories for me, and it is an absolutely stunning piece and for free. If you would like for us to feature one of your treasures on one of our videos, just send an email to the address on the screen with a picture and a description, and we will be happy to share it in an upcoming video. All right, everybody, I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you haven't subscribed already, please do so. We'd love to have you, and we will see you in the next video. Bye-bye.